She had everything, then nothing. Standing on the edge of that bridge, Elise Harrington made her choice, until a janitor's simple words stopped her. Sometimes the richest people are the ones without a penny to their name. If you want to discover how a billionaire who lost it all found something more valuable than money could ever buy, stay with me until the end. This story changed my perspective on what truly matters in life, and I hope it touches your heart too. If it does, please consider liking this video and subscribing to see more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. The cold metal railing bit into Elise Harrington's palms as she stared down at the churning water below. 42 stories of financial empire had crumbled beneath her feet in a single day. The Harrington name, once synonymous with success, power, and influence, was now being dragged through every newspaper and financial report as the scandal of the decade. 3 hours earlier, she had walked out of the federal courthouse to a barrage of camera flashes and shouted questions. Her CFO had embezzled billions, orchestrated a Ponzi scheme that made Madoff look like an amateur, and somehow, despite her Harvard MBA and legendary business acumen, she had missed it all. The SEC investigation had cleared her of criminal wrongdoing, but the civil suits would take everything she had left. Her board had ousted her. Her friends, if you could call the social climbers who surrounded the wealthy friends, had vanished overnight. Elise had driven aimlessly through the city, eventually finding herself at Westlake Bridge just as dusk settled over the skyline. The same skyline where the Harrington Tower had once stood as her crowning achievement. Tomorrow it would be renamed. Not much of a view tonight. The voice startled her. Elise turned to see a man in gray maintenance coveralls, pushing a cleaning cart along the pedestrian walkway of the bridge. His face was weathered but kind, with crow's feet around eyes that seemed to hold both weariness and warmth. "I wasn't looking at the view," she said, her voice hollow. The man nodded, stopping his cart. "I know who you are, Ms. Harrington. Been seeing your face on the news all week." Elise turned away. "Then you know I'm not worth talking to." "Funny thing about worth," he said, leaning against his mop. "People get it mixed up with price all the time." Despite herself, Elise felt a flicker of curiosity. What's that supposed to mean? Just that sometimes the richest people are the ones without a penny to their name. He extended a calloused hand. "I'm Ray. Ray Mendez. I clean this bridge 5 nights a week, among other places." Elise hesitated before taking his hand. "Why are you talking to me, Ray?" "Because 20 years ago, I was standing right where you are, looking down at that same water." He gestured to the spot where she stood. "Lost my wife to cancer. Had a 5-year-old son. Medical bills took everything. Thought he'd be better off with the life insurance than with a broken father." The simplicity with which he shared his darkest moment struck Elise. In her world, vulnerability was weakness, and weakness was unacceptable. "What stopped you?" she asked quietly. "An old woman walking her dog. She asked me for directions, then invited me for coffee. Talked to me for 3 hours about nothing important. By the time I left, the moment had passed." Ray smiled. Sometimes a second chance comes disguised as a small interruption. Elise looked back at the water. "My second chance would need to be pretty spectacular. I've lost everything." "Everything?" Ray raised an eyebrow. "You still breathing?" "Yes, but..." "Then you've got more than everything. You've got the only thing that matters, possibility." Ray reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He flipped it open to show a photo of a young man in a graduation cap and gown. "My son. Graduated medical school last year. If I'd jumped, he never would have had the chance to become who he is." Something in Elise's chest tightened. "He looks like you." "Poor kid," Ray laughed. "Listen, I get off in an hour. There's a diner around the corner that makes pancakes all night. Best in the city. Join me?" Elise stared at him, this stranger offering pancakes instead of judgment. Why would you want to have pancakes with someone like me? Someone like you? Ray shrugged. I see someone who's hurting. The rest is just details. Those words, so simple, yet they cut through the noise in Elise's head. For weeks, she had been nothing but the sum of her failures, defined entirely by what she had lost. This man, this janitor, saw only her humanity. I could eat, she finally said. Ray nodded, as if her acceptance was the most natural thing in the world. Good. I'll finish my shift. Meet you at Lenny's on 9th, blue awning, can't miss it. As Ray pushed his cart away, Elise stepped back from the railing. The impulse that had brought her to the bridge hadn't disappeared, but it had been interrupted, just as Ray had described. A small interruption that might be the beginning of something else. An hour later, Elise sat across from Ray in a vinyl booth at Lenny's diner. The place was nearly empty, save for a couple of night shift workers and an elderly man reading a newspaper. The waitress, a woman named Doris with improbably red hair, seemed to know Ray well. Your usual, Ray? And for your friend? Doris asked, pencil poised over her notepad. Blueberry stack for me, Ray confirmed. Elise? The same, Elise said, realizing she hadn't eaten all day. When Doris walked away, Ray folded his hands on the table. His nails were clean but his fingers bore the marks of physical labor, calluses, a few small scars, a slightly crooked index finger that had probably been broken once. So, he said. Tell me something about yourself that isn't in the news. Elise blinked. Like what? Anything. What makes you smile? What did you want to be when you were a kid? What's your favorite book? The questions were so ordinary, so disconnected from the catastrophe that had consumed her life, that Elise found herself momentarily speechless. I used to paint, she finally said. Watercolors. I was actually pretty good. Ray's face lit up. Yeah? What did you paint? Landscapes, mostly. I loved capturing light on water. Elise hadn't thought about her painting in years. She'd abandoned it during business school, deeming it an impractical use of time. My son, Miguel, he draws. Comic book stuff. Always has. Even when we were living in a shelter for a while, he'd draw on any scrap of paper he could find. Ray's pride was evident in his voice. Never tried to talk him out of it, even when people said he should focus on more practical things. You lived in a shelter? Elise asked, trying to imagine this confident man in such circumstances. Ray nodded. For 8 months after I lost our apartment. Worked 3 jobs to get us out. Hardest time of my life, but also when I learned the most about what matters. Their pancakes arrived, steaming and golden. Ray immediately drowned his in syrup, while Elise cut a small, precise piece. What did you learn? She asked after taking a bite. The pancakes were indeed excellent. That dignity isn't something the world gives you or takes away. It's something you carry. Ray pointed his fork at her. And that most problems that seem permanent at 2 a.m. look different by morning. Elise considered this as she ate. Her entire adult identity had been built around achievement, acquisition, and influence. Without those things, who was she? I don't know how to start over, she admitted. I've never failed at anything before. Ray laughed, a warm sound that drew a curious glance from the elderly man with the newspaper. Welcome to the human race, Ms. Billionaire. The rest of us fail all the time. It's not the falling that matters, it's the getting back up. Easy to say when you haven't fallen from as high up, Elise countered. Maybe, Ray conceded. But the ground feels just as hard no matter where you fall from. And getting up takes the same muscles. They ate in silence for a moment, the diner's soft background music filling the space between them. What will you do now? Ray finally asked. Elise set down her fork. I don't know. The lawsuits will take years. I'll probably have to sell my apartment, my car, everything. And after that? The question hung in the air. After that. The concept that there would be an after to this catastrophe was something Elise hadn't allowed herself to consider. I have a business degree and 20 years of experience, she said slowly. But my name is toxic now. No company will touch me. Ray nodded thoughtfully. So maybe it's time to touch something else. What do you mean? I mean, maybe this is the universe's way of showing you a different path. Ray wiped his mouth with a napkin. When I was at my lowest, I made a promise to myself. If I stayed alive, I'd spend the rest of my life helping others stay alive too. Is that why you talked to me on the bridge? Elise asked. Partly, Ray admitted. But also because I recognized that look. The one that says you're calculating whether the world is better off without you. It's a faulty equation, by the way. Always is. Elise felt tears threatening for the first time in years. In her world, crying was unacceptable, a sign of weakness, of losing control. But here, in this dingy diner with a janitor who had seen through her in seconds, the carefully constructed walls began to crumble. I don't know who I am without my company, she whispered. Ray reached across the table and briefly touched her hand, a gesture so unexpected and gentle that Elise didn't pull away. That's the beautiful part, he said. You get to find out. As they finished their pancakes, Ray told Elise about his life, raising Miguel alone, working multiple jobs to put him through college, the community of people at the shelter who had become like family. He spoke without self-pity or grandiosity, simply stating the facts of his existence with occasional flashes of humor. Miguel wants me to move to Boston now that he's starting his residency, Ray said. But I've got my routines here. My people. The bridge needs me, he added with a wink. You saved my life tonight, Elise said suddenly. I need you to know that. Ray shook his head. No, I just interrupted a bad moment. You saved your own life by being willing to eat pancakes with a stranger. When the check came, Elise reached for it automatically, then remembered her credit cards had been frozen. A flush of embarrassment colored her cheeks. I can't even buy you pancakes, she said, mortified. Ray smiled and placed a $20 bill on the table. Tonight's on me. Next time's on you. Next time? Sure. I eat pancakes every Thursday after my shift. You're welcome to join. He stood up, stretching slightly. But if you want to repay me now, I have a better idea. What's that? Elise asked. The community center where I volunteer needs someone to teach an art class. Their regular teacher moved away last month. Ray's eyes twinkled. You mentioned watercolors. Elise stared at him. I haven't painted in 20 years. Perfect time to start again, don't you think? As they walked out of the diner, the night air had lost its earlier chill. Or perhaps Elise simply felt it less. Ray pointed out the community center as they passed it, a modest building with a mural of children's handprints decorating one wall. Classes are Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, he said. Mostly kids from the shelter and some seniors from the assisted living facility next door. Ray, I don't think. Just come once, he interrupted gently. If it's not for you, no harm done. But I've got a feeling about this. At the corner where they would part ways, Ray handed her a simple business card with the community center's address and his phone number. For what it's worth, he said, I think the world still needs Elise Harrington. Just maybe not the version you've been playing all these years. With that, he gave a small wave and walked away, his figure gradually disappearing into the night. Elise stood on the corner, the card in her hand feeling simultaneously weightless and the heaviest thing she'd ever held. The next morning, Elise woke in her luxury apartment, possibly for one of the last times, and made a decision. She found an old box in her storage closet, untouched for decades. Inside were her watercolors, brushes, and a sketchbook filled with the landscapes of her youth. The paints had dried up, the brushes were stiff, but they existed, evidence of a person she had once been. She spent the day making calls, to her lawyer, to the bankruptcy trustee, to the few former employees who still took her calls. The process of dismantling her life would be long and painful, but for the first time, she could see beyond it. On Tuesday afternoon, Elise walked into the community center carrying a bag of new art supplies she had purchased from a discount store. Her designer clothes had been replaced with jeans and a simple blouse, all she could afford now that her assets were frozen. The art room was small but bright, with tables arranged in a circle and windows that let in streams of natural light. A dozen faces turned to look at her as she entered, children with wary eyes, elderly men and women with curious expressions, and in the corner, Ray, who nodded encouragingly. "Everyone," he announced, "this is Ms. Elise. She's going to teach us watercolors today." A small girl with braids raised her hand immediately. "Are you the lady from the news? The one who lost all the money?" The room fell silent. Elise felt her heart rate accelerate. This had been a mistake. These people knew who she was, or who she had been. How could she possibly? "Yes," she heard herself say. "That's me. I lost everything. But today I'm hoping to find something new. Would you like to learn how to paint water?" The girl nodded, and slowly, the tension in the room dissolved. As Elise began to demonstrate basic watercolor techniques, she felt a strange sensation in her chest, a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The children were attentive, the seniors asked thoughtful questions, and for 2 hours, no one mentioned billions or fraud or failure. When the class ended, an elderly woman named Ruth approached her, clutching a painting of what might have been a sunset or possibly a large orange cat. It was hard to tell. "I haven't made art since grade school," Ruth said, beaming. "This isn't very good, but it felt wonderful to create something." Elise looked at the joyful mess of colors on Ruth's paper and felt something shift inside her. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. Ray found her cleaning brushes after everyone had left. "So?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "So," Elise replied, "I'll be back on Thursday." Ray's smile was worth more than any business deal she had ever closed. In the weeks that followed, Elise's external circumstances grew increasingly dire. Her apartment was sold to help satisfy creditors. Her car, her art collection, her designer wardrobe, all gone. She moved into a small studio apartment in a neighborhood she once would have avoided. She ate ramen noodles and learned to navigate public transportation. But twice a week, she taught art at the community center. And slowly, other opportunities emerged. A local coffee shop displayed her students' artwork, which led to a commission for Elise to paint a mural on their wall. The owner of a bookstore asked if she would teach a weekend watercolor workshop. It wasn't much money, barely enough to supplement her rapidly dwindling savings, but it was something. More importantly, it was meaningful. For the first time in her adult life, Elise was creating rather than acquiring, connecting rather than networking. Ray became a fixture in her new life. They met for pancakes every Thursday night, where he would listen to her fears and frustrations without judgment. He introduced her to Miguel during one of his visits home, and the young doctor shared stories of patients who had lost everything to illness but found new purpose in recovery. "Mom would have liked you," Miguel told Elise one evening, causing Ray to blink rapidly and excuse himself to the restroom. 6 months after their first meeting on the bridge, Elise received notice that the final settlement had been reached. After all debts were paid, she would be left with exactly $0.00. The empire she had spent decades building was officially gone. She took the letter to the bridge where she had met Ray, standing in the spot where she had once contemplated ending.